As the kids run off to kids' church. Man, that's half the church this morning. That's a good sign, though. That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Anyway, this Carmen's gonna have a big bunch today. That's good. Now that they're gone, we can talk about. We're going to talk about Jesus and swearing. Not talking about dropping the various letter bombs out there. That's a discussion maybe for another day. But we're talking about oaths and swearing and lying. Now, fortunately, nobody here has ever had a struggle with telling the truth, right? I mean, in this group, has anyone here never told a lie? Okay, you're lying. You're lying right now in the house of God. But we're working through the Sermon on the Mount. I kind of wondered, does anyone read ahead and then skip the week they don't want to go to because it might be too convicting? You know, like last week they're like, oh, I got a lust problem. I'm not coming to the week we talk about adultery and lust. Now you go, no, if I don't worry, I don't remember who missed last week. Some of you are like, well, I didn't go. Now Jeff's judging me. I'm judging you already, but now you just know about it. I'm kidding. Anyway, in Matthew chapter 5, we're working through the things in the Sermon on the Mount, which is a lot of stuff about how you actually live out this faith thing. You know, how do you actually put, feet to your faith? How does it change your daily life? Because, you don't have to change your life in order to have faith, but when you have faith and you really put your trust in Jesus, it changes the way you live. And you'll live differently because of it. And so Matthew chapter 5, starting verse 33, Jesus says, you have also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows, you must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. But I say to you, do not make any vows, do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne, and do not say by the earth, because the earth is his footstool, and do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not even say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black, even though you might really want to. Or bring it back, but just say a simple, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. Now, you've heard that our ancestors were told. Now, if you go into the Old Testament and you try to kind of to find that verse, it's sort of an amalgamation of a few verses. That's a big word, right? But we're going to jump in a couple of those. It's this summary of a lot of things that when you read the Old Testament, you read the Hebrew Bible, there's these commands that the Israelite people were given, because if you're going to be the people of God, and they serve a couple different functions, because they kind of needed a whole law, legal code. So, some of them are legal codes, and a lot of them are talking about that, if you have faith, this is how you have to live it out. And so Exodus 20, verse 7 says, you must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. And that one's interesting because the whole idea to not misuse the name of the Lord, you also didn't want to use it flippantly, and that's why in the Hebrew text, they actually changed, because the name of God is Yahweh, and they changed it to, they put different vowels on it, and that's where we get the word Jehovah, which is sort of a made-up name for God, because it's actually the consonants for one thing. Y's and J's are kind of the same when they get translated into English. I know it's confusing there, but if you all spoke Hebrew, this would be fine. So this is also a good time to announce we have the Hebrew class this summer. I'm kidding. I would teach one if people would come. But it's so, to not misuse the name of the Lord, they even changed it in the text with a vowel pointing so you don't accidentally say it. So there was this great reverence for the name of God. I learned my Hebrew from an Israeli drill sergeant, and so I couldn't even say Jehovah. She was like, she wouldn't even say that. It'd be like the name. That's all we got. Anyway, see. That's a whole other story for a whole other sermon that we're probably not going to preach anytime soon. But Leviticus 19:12 says, do not bring shame on the name of the Lord your God, but using it to swear falsely, I am the Lord. Numbers 30 says in verse 2, a man makes a vow to the Lord or makes a pledge under oath, must never break it. He must do exactly what he said he would do, or she. Deuteronomy 23. So you're looking for the loophole. You're like, well, it didn't say she. No. Deuteronomy 23 says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, be prompt in fulfilling whatever you promised him, for the Lord your God demands that you promptly fulfill your vows, or you will be guilty of sin. However, it is not a sin to refrain from making a vow, but once you have voluntarily made a vow, be careful to fulfill your promise to the Lord. So they take all this stuff, they kind of compact it into, and we all have ways we understand and interpret the Bible. And there's times where someone's told me, oh, well, you have to do this because the Bible says, and I'm like, that's not at all what the Bible says. I mean, I see where you're kind of deriving that, but that's not it. And so they took these verses, these understandings of how you're supposed to relate to telling the truth, how you're supposed to relate to making vows or promises and saying you're going to do things, they compact it into this. And Jesus says, hey, you've heard it said, but you're kind of misinterpreting and living a little differently than I would have you live. It says, do not make any vows. Now, we're not talking about wedding vows. We talked about marriage and wedding last week. We actually did a vow renewal at the end of the service. You missed that. You can go watch it online. For some reason, the camera did it sideways. We do it the same way every week, but every once in a while it does something crazy like sideways. So if you're watching on your phone, you have to turn it this way or turn your head that way, or if you don't put the auto lock on, you'll be like half this way, half that way, trying to get. But you can watch it. And this doesn't get you out of your wedding vows. You're like, oh no, Lord said no vows. Bye, Felicia. I'm not talking about. We're not talking about you can't promise to tell the truth in court. That's taking this, out of. This doesn't get you out of your mortgage contract. You're like religious obligations. I can no longer pay my mortgage because I don't agree with this. No, but what Jesus is talking about is this custom or practice developed to sort of make vows, but with loopholes, because we like loopholes, right? Because we can make a promise or do something, but then we got something, I swear by my beard. If I make a vow, but I didn't swear by God, I swore by my beard, and so, I can get out of it. Or, I had my fingers crossed. Anyone do that growing up? You can make whatever promises you want. You're like, ha! I crossed my fingers. I didn't pinky promise. I was trying to find this is like how ADD I am. I was trying to find the origin of that, and there's all kinds of different theories about how that originated. But somehow the pinky promise is more binding than anything in our culture, because you pinky promised. Yeah, I didn't pinky promise, Anyway, some of you get that, some of you don't. But it says, but do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne, and by earth, by my head, can't turn one, hair white or black. The thought behind is this, that the people were, if they avoided vowing specifically to God, there wasn't a prohibition against that, using those verses that we just read, and so they would sort of get out of that. Now, I was actually reading through the Mishnah, because I'm geeky like that. There's all these types of vows and different things, and people trying to figure out, you have to, in this case you have to do it, in this case you don't, and all this stuff. But big point is, people would say one thing, but if you didn't swear by the right formula, you didn't actually invoke the name of God, you can get out of it. It's like fingers crossed. I didn't say the name of God. It says anything beyond this is from the evil one. We missed that phrase. It's funny. My first draft of my outline, I actually do use an outline. I know you don't think I do sometimes, but I even left that one out because it's we missed that. It's Satan is father of all lies. Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. The first lie is, hey, did God really say? And he starts twisting things, and so there's this anything beyond that, it's not Jesus-y. We use that word if you're not familiar with it yet. We say hashtag Jesus-y, or now we don't say hashtag as much because hashtags aren't as cool. But we say Jesus-y, and I remember I was in a meeting I told you some about, and it was like the people who oversee our network of churches, they're asking, what do you want from us? And I was like, I want you to be Jesus-y. And they're like, you mean Christ-like? I said, no, I mean Jesus-y. I made them write Jesus-y on the board. Because Christ-like I mean, good word. Don't get me wrong. I'll still use it sometimes. But we kind of go, oh, what does that mean? I think Jesus, he hammers in on, I want you to be like Jesus. I don't want you to just interpret this word, because we have religious words that we interpret kind of how we interpret them, you know what I mean? And it's like, I remember coming and working with youth, and, I preached a sermon that had this discussion group, and I was asking people questions, and they gave me an answer, and I'm like, okay, could you do that without all the Christianese terms in there? I mean, because we have these words we use. Anyway, so I like Jesus-y. I say all that to say we want people to be like Jesus-y. And so anything that's, it's not from the evil one, it's not Jesus-y, is not what we're going for. Now, here we go. Lying equals bad. Even if, you may not have really know a lot about the Bible, you may have come in, first time here and be like, I didn't know the Bible said that. I mean, most of us probably knew that was in there, right? You're like, okay, here's Jeff, it's a whole sermon on something we know is obviously wrong. Also don't murder your parents. Like, okay, Jeff, you got Captain Obvious here. But, most of us would say, hey, we know lying is bad. But the problem is, it's a little harder sometimes to live out. Now, some of you are thinking, I don't lie. We'll get to you. Here's the thing. Jesus is not only concerned about truthfulness as an ethical principle, but it's really, it's also, invoking the name of God, which is, so this side sermon, people use the word, OMG. I will not let my kids to type OMG. I think, that's just kind of this, we say that full expression, oh my, we'll do it. Just a fun side sermon. I like to mess with people when they say that, or, people love to say Jesus, and, they give them different initials in the two, and also, like, if someone says, like, keeps saying, oh my God, I'm only saying that to the, example of it, not to flippantly say it, but I'll like find out their dad's name. I'll be like, oh my Clarence. I love, I like messing with people. That's my dad's name. Anyway, kind of, I think people flippantly use it, but and we have all these forms of swearing in our culture that maybe we even miss. Anyone, I swear by my mother's grave. Anyone ever heard that one? Okay. Cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Ouch! Why would you do that? I was trying to Google like cultural examples, and I found, I swear by the moon and the stars in the sky. all for one, if you like R&B, or John Michael Montgomery if you're country folks. I swear on a stack of Bibles. Like one is not good enough. We're just going to do a whole stack, and we'll make it loud because volume matters, because there's lots of, but, which is ironic, because when you're swearing on a stack of Bibles, you're in a court saying, I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good, or whatever. That was a Harry Potter reference for the few hands. But, there's this whole, stack of Bibles, you're swearing on a Bible that says don't take oaths. But I'll let you kind of work that one out for yourself. Anyway, my experience is normally people who have all this stuff they swear on. Now, maybe it's just with people with me. What happens, though, a lot of times? A lot of times they're not truthful people. That's why they have to add this kind of extra stuff in there, because you don't trust or believe them. I don't trust them anymore because they said on their mother's grave, their mother's not even dead. So how, Jesus says that, everything by which one can swear ultimately is God, and demands that people just simply be as good as their word. Your yes, yes. Your no, no. And it's okay to say no, too, sometimes to people. That's a whole other sermon. And so we see this in practice. I think something that'll help maybe put some feet on this. In Matthew 23, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and this is like in the middle of a passage we call like the 7 woes. Jesus is like, whoa, like Joey Lawrence. No, but he's saying, hey, woe on you, hey, bad stuff y'all doing. And he's talking to the religious leaders, and he says, you're blind guides, which is not, if you want a guide, you generally want one who's going to lead you, who could see where they're going. So, hey, you're a blind guide. You're leading people, but you really have no idea where you're going. This is before, walkways with things in Braille. And anyway, whatsoever awaits you, for you say that it means nothing to swear by God's temple. See where we're going? but that is binding to swear by the gold in the temple. See, they made up rules, like, you can swear by this, but you can't swear by that. Blind fools, which is more important, the gold in the temple or the temple that makes the gold sacred? And you say that to swear by the altar is not binding, but to swear by the gifts of the altar is binding. You see, they're making up kind of categories of you can. A lot of times these start off with good intentions. Like, people don't start off going, I would like to be a hypocrite. How can I make up crazy rules and laws? But in the process, maybe you do, I don't. But in the process of sort of trying to live this out, they kind of make up these crazy rules and everything. Jesus isn't into that, though. He says, how blind, which is more important, the gift on the altar or the altar that makes the gift sacred? When you swear by the altar, you're swearing by it and everything on it. When you swear by the temple, you're swearing by it and by God who lives in it. And when you swear by heaven, you're swearing by the throne of God and by God who sits on the throne. And so they developed this system of oaths of when they can do it and when they can't. And it's sort of this kind of crazy system. But James says it later in James chapter 5, verse 12, says, but most of all, my brothers and sisters, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else, just a simple yes or no, so that you will not sin and be condemned. And we agree with that totally. We go, oh, that's good, right? But how many of us lie? No one wants to raise their hand. Okay, a couple of you. The rest of you are, by not raising your hand, you're lying. Most of us always misrepresent the truth. Or not always. Always, that's a whole other problem. But, most of us will occasionally misrepresent the truth for some reason. Okay, I made a list. You're at church. Imagine that for a second. It shouldn't be hard because you're in church. Now, someone's telling you all their woes and problems. And it's keep going on. At some point you go, well, I'll pray for you. But you're not really thinking, I'm going to pray for them. You're thinking, oh my gosh, will you stop talking? I'm not going to pray for you, but I'm going to say that because that's the Christian way to end a conversation. Anyone ever do that? Some of you are going, wait, Jeff said he'd pray for me last week. Or then you forget to pray for someone you said you'd pray for them, and you see them, and you're like, oh, there's Bob. I was supposed to pray for Bob. God bless Bob. Bob, been praying for you. Some of you have done that. Does this dress make me look blank? I'm just going to leave that. Husbands, you got to figure out how to answer that. Do you like my haircut? Do you like my hair? You're like, no, you don't like it? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. But, that's one of those, like, awkward. A friend once asked me if I liked her haircut, and I said no. I really preferred it the other way. Anyway, not friends anymore. Some people don't want honesty. That's a whole other thing. Someone calls on the phone. Remember when we had phones that attached to walls? Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but there used to be phones, and they had cords, and they were springly. I don't know, they're coiled. Springly, is that a word? Anyway, hey, they're not home. Well, what if they're home? And then we try to okay, well, they step outside. Well, they're not in the house, sorry. Anyone ever go, it's technically you're being correct, but we say these little things sometimes. Okay, here's one. I'm on my way. By that you mean I haven't even gotten dressed. I'm heading in the direction of, but I'm already late.
I'm on my way.
But I usually tell you I'm on my way when I'm in the car, at least. But if those of you who don't know me, first time you meet with me, if I don't know you, I will probably be on time. After we're friends, I love you when I show up 15 minutes late. I was sitting waiting for someone the other day. They'd been a half hour late the last time and not showed up, and then they showed up quite late for the next appointment. I just had to laugh because I've just started bringing a book when I meet people too because, now I'm getting better. I go early and like hang out and wait for the appointment because I'm the kind of person always try to cram one more thing. Anyone? You're like, I can get one more thing done. Then you look up like, ah! Can I not break the speed limit and make it to downtown Dover in 4 minutes? No. Calling in sick at work. Or are you just sick of working? Some people just make your sick days personal days too that you can take automatically because they know there's days where you just don't want to work and they help you not lie. I'm fine. You know, it's funny. I actually try to tell people when they say, how are you? I actually try to tell them how I'm doing. Sometimes a lot of times I say I'm terrible just to see if they're listening. Because, I've been in a restaurant, the waitress is like, oh, how are you? I'm like, I'm terrible. They're like, great. The specials today are. And I'm like, there goes your tip. No, not really. I still tip well because it's a small town and people will know. People don't really want to know. They're not even listening. And so you say, "Are fine." We're really not. But that's, kind of, it can get weird when you actually answer how you feel. Instagram and Facebook. Almost all lies. I've seen people's lives online, and they look so beautiful and perfect. And then you know them in real life, you're like, you're not at all like you are in real life, because you're like, you're sad, you're angry, you're, emotional, and then, I love, I'm not saying people with families, but it's usually people with families. They post all these, like, beautiful pictures of their kids, like with chalkboard things on the first days of school, and everything looks like they just came from a photo shoot. That's awesome, but real life looks a little crazier for those of us with kids. Now, if your life really is that way, great, and you can post the things, but sometimes we try to act like our life, we have it all together, but truthfully, a lot of us struggle, right? we have things a little hard, and things don't always turn out the way we might think. My phone died. Translation: I didn't want to talk to you, so I turned it off. It's so great to see you. If I'd seen you first, I would have hidden in the next aisle. It's not about looks; it's about personality. Then why did you swipe right before you looked at their profile? Some of you don't know what the swipe right there. Anyway, I had to Google that to find out which way you swipe, because I'm not on dating profile stuff. One, I'm too old. Two, I'm married happily, 25 years. Woo woo. Anyway, it's not about you. It's me. It's usually you. I've got plans to avoid you. I try to get to the gym 4 times a week. By try, I mean, I'd never even think about going. LOL. Yeah, really? It's really, laughing inside everyone, because most of us are not literally laughing out loud, right? So it's LIE, laughing inside everyone. See what I did there? That's all me. I wrote that. Anyway, we leave out some of the truth because it's convenient. People are like, I don't watch TV. Now, I watched a 20-hour Netflix marathon yesterday on my phone, but it was, I don't watch TV. It's, so good. We exaggerate. We are an internationally recognized firm. Yeah, we have one client from Canada. We misrepresent things. I popularized with the United States by Mark Twain and among some others who, it's attributed to the British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. There are 3 kinds of lies, and I'm going to change this slightly: lies, darn lies, and statistics. Anyone ever use statistics to change things a little bit? 83% of all statistics are made up on the spot, including that one. Okay, some of you get it. Anyway. Now I'm going to ask you again, has anyone ever told a lie? And still a few of you are just nodding but not want to raise your hand because it's awkward. And we have the camera facing the other way today on Facebook, so you're all raising your hands going, yes, it was me. Okay, but we all struggle. And there's some times where maybe it's not as clear. I'm not saying, I'm a follower of Jesus. I got to tell you, that dress does not look good on you. And it's not the dress, no. But here's the thing. we all have these struggles. And are there ever times where it's okay to not tell the truth? When you click, I've read the terms and conditions. Like, did I lie? Because I didn't click the term. I didn't read. Here's the thing. Okay, classic example: hiding Jewish people during World War II. Germans come to the door. Are you hiding Jews? I'm a Christian, I got to tell you, they're in the attic. No! I think most of us would say that there's times maybe where it's okay. But and I don't think that's what Jesus is saying here. We're supposed to be people of truth, but there are sometimes some examples where maybe it's not. Hebrew midwives. In Exodus chapter 1, if you read it, the midwives to the Hebrew people, the Hebrews, there were just too many of them. They were coming, and so the Pharaoh's like, "Hey, kill the kids," and so the Hebrew the midwives, they're like, they're not killing the kids. They're like, it's wrong, and they get called before Pharaoh, and they're like, oh well, they're too vigorous and they strong, and they have the kids before we get there. So they kind of told a little lie, right? Because there was a greater good sometimes at work, and God rewards them with their own families. He says he dealt with well with the midwives. He gave them families. And so, it was funny. I was reading one person who was trying to argue that even though good came out of that, God didn't approve of that. And I have trouble when I read the text because I think differently. And that's an extreme kind of situation. Rahab, if you've read the story, Joshua 2, she hides the spies who come in to scout out the land, eventually becomes, part of the genealogy of Jesus. James says this in chapter 2, verse 25, Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. So I would argue that God was okay with these. And again, I was reading, people's thoughts on this, and they were like, oh, well, those weren't really lies, because, they were. And there are times where it serves sort of a greater world. Now, in the evil world, in a desperate situation, there's times where if you commit a lesser evil by lying in order to prevent a much greater evil. But most of us are probably not faced with this kind of situation every day. Most of us are not hiding people who could be, killed if we, unjustly because, we're hiding them in our attic or something. Most of us are not, having God's spies come into the land and hide them. So there are all these things. Most of us are faced with much more mundane situations where we have to choose, are we going to choose truth over trickery? Are we going to choose it? And ultimately, Jesus is truth. John 14 says this. It says, don't let your heart be troubled. This is Jesus speaking. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am, and you know the way to where I am going. And this is a very comforting passage for most of us, right? I often read this at funerals and things, because not that you can't read it at times other than funerals, but it's one of these encouraging things, because we know that Christ has a place for us where we put our faith and our trust and our hopes in Him, that we have this heavenly home, we have this place of eternal life. And Thomas, and I love Thomas, because Thomas, he gets a bad rap for being a doubting Thomas, because, after, the resurrection, and he's like, well, unless I see the holes in Jesus' hands, I'm not buying this. But, dead people normally stay dead, so, I'm okay with Thomas, because he was a little like, come on, you dudes have been imagining stuff. Anyway, but Thomas, he always says some interesting cases. Thomas is like, Lord, we have no idea where you're going, so how can we know the way? Because he'd been telling Thomas, but Thomas didn't get it. Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Now, I am the way. Jesus is the way to heaven. He is the life. He's the way to true and eternal life. And here's the truth. Now, that's a big statement to unpack in the middle of this sermon, but that would be a whole sermon in and of itself. But Jesus is the truth. He is the truth. And so we trust His word and His promise. So when He says, I go to prepare a place for you, we trust that, right? We don't expect Jesus to come back and go, psych! gotcha, no place for you, party over. No heaven for you. But if we're following Jesus, hopefully you follow my logic here, if we're following and trusting in Jesus, it means that we live that way, that we are honest and truthful in our words, that we choose truth over trickery. We choose to be, and this is one of the themes in the Sermon on the Mount, is that we choose to be salt and light. And we talked about salt. Salt, it flavors things. It makes it better. Salt brings healing. And as followers and believers of Jesus, we need to be salt to the world. And we need to be light. We need to shine light in the darkness. And one of the ways we do that is we live truthful, even in a culture that sometimes doesn't want truth. And it can be hard. It's easy for me to stand up here and go, oh, you need to be truthful. I don't work where you work. I don't have your family. It's a tough thing. I have a friend. I know you're like, oh, great, Jeff, you have one friend. That's good. Hopefully, I haven't lost any of you. but I have a friend, and they're a pastor at a church, and they recently went through some building programs and different things. And I'll never forget something he said. And it's funny because it's not that uncommon to hear this from pastors behind the scenes. Now you're like behind the scenes here for a second, But he says, "I'll never hire a Christian contractor." That's surprising, right? That's shocking, right? He's been in ministry for a really long time. But you know what his experience has been? You hire the Christian contractor who cuts corners. You hire the Christian contractor who lies to you about the price to get the bid. Now, are there good Christian contractors out there? Certainly. But I think his statement was, and I'm not saying he would never hire a Christian, but it's, if someone comes to him and it's like, they push the Jesus thing on him, like, a church contract, I want to bid on that. But if they don't follow through on their word, they're not really following Jesus the way we're supposed to. We should be people who are known by following our word, keeping our, being truthful. And a lot of times, sometimes Christians' business practices don't line up with, things. Now I know a lot of people say they're Christian just to get the bid and all that stuff, and that's part of his point there. But Christians in business, too many Christians sometimes don't do what they say. But we need to choose truth over trickery. Earlier showing that's salt and light. Flavor, healing. We're supposed to shine in the darkness. Some of us lied so much. I'll be honest. It may seem impossible to tell the truth. You ever know one of those? You have a friend like that? Anyone? Okay, just me. I have a. It's funny because some people are so conditioned to lying they don't even think about it. Like you find your kid, there's writing all over the wall. Anyone never find this? And they're standing there with a marker, and they're like, "I didn't do it." Well, who did it? Thieves broke in, took the marker, and you just found it at the scene and happened to pick it up. They're the same ones later, like, "Oh, look, I just found this gun. I didn't shoot that guy." Anyway. No, not to say your kid's going to turn out to be a murderer, but sometimes people, our lives are so complex we can't even remember the lives. I think I've shared this story with you before. But a friend who called me like before he got on the flight, and he's like, "Oh, my sister died. I have to move back to Delaware. All this stuff. Can you please pick me up at the airport?" Now, one, I'm a sucker for airport. I shouldn't say this because we're online too. But it's usually if someone says they need a ride to the airport or back, I'm always going to try to make it happen. I said that last time, and then Devin's like, "Hey, can you give me a ride to the airport?" Shout out to Devin. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll try it." I was like, "What time's your flight?" And he's like, 6. I'm like, "Oh, we gotta leave at 6? No, my flight's at 6. I'm like, "Oh, so we have to leave at 3:30 in the morning." Anyway, didn't really want to do it. Love you, Devin. But I did it because, I'm just a nice guy. I'm too nice a guy. I'm like always going to drive people to the airport or pick them up. So I would have picked up my friend at the airport, whether he made up this crazy thing or not. Now, I would have maybe had to say, "Hey, I'm going to be a little bit late because I do have to finish this other commitment." But I'm not going to leave you stranded at the airport. This was like the days before Uber, and you Lyft and you could get a ride. Anyway, it was funny because, I kind of suspected something when I talked to him later. I was like, I think he's lying to me. And so, I waited like a couple weeks and I asked him how his sister was. Oh, she's doing well. I'm like, that's funny because she's dead. And he only had one sister, which is important to that story, I guess. But here's the thing, there's some people, you've lied so much, it's almost hard to keep track of it. And really, it's a harder way to live. And a lot of times I think people think, I remember I had this conversation with someone recently online. They're like, oh, Christianity is so hard. I'm like, yeah, it is, but also living, outside of the will of God is kind of hard too. Because you have to keep track of your lies. You have to keep track of all these things you said. And sometimes living the Jesus way is an easier, simpler way. Now, it can be hard at times because you have to have that hard conversation with someone about, am I lying or not? And sometimes we lie because we just don't want to confront things. It's those hard things. But it's an easier and a better way to live. It's this new way of living. Ephesians 4:15 says it this way. It says, instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. And faith is something, and we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount, we're talking about the ways that we should live. Ultimately, we should grow up and become more like Christ. And we should look different. And again, it's when you start out in faith, it really is, it's this life change, and it's by putting your faith and trust in Jesus, and often you kind of look the same way you looked. But over time, you should grow. And we were talking to somebody recently, and they're probably watching this and they'll laugh at it. But, we were talking about what it is to grow in Christ. Sometimes it's funny because we're like, it's a typical thing. People are like, oh, well, I'm new in the faith. Oh, I'm new in the faith. It's like, well, you've been in the faith 8 years now. So it's time to eventually not be new in the faith. And so we were talking to somebody, we're like, picture your head on a giant baby. And there was kind of this funny image, because if you picture your head on a giant baby, at some point that baby need to grow up. When we put these things into practice, we should grow, and we need to grow up. We need to grow in our faith and become people who are following Jesus. Now, as believers, our lives then look different. Now, here's a cool, saying I heard one time. It says, you're the only Bible some people will ever read. How well do you represent the words in there? Gospel, if we use the word a lot of times in church. Gospel is a translation of the Greek word euangelion, meaning, the good news. So I heard someone say this. It says, if you're the only gospel, if the only gospel people ever hear was your life, would they say it's good news? If we don't put it into practice, it's really not good news. When we live differently, other people see that. That's a part of being salt. That's part of being light. And ultimately, we need to choose truth over trickery. Truthfulness builds trust. That trust, it's the way God intended us to live. And our relationships with our family will change because they can trust us. I think a lot of times the reason we lie is we want to avoid hard conversations, right? There's things we don't really want to bring up. There's things we don't want to talk about. But ultimately, if we have that conversation, it leads to growth. It leads to renewed relationships. Our relationships at work will change. As an employee, can you be trusted to do your job, or lie that you did it or passed it off, or that you didn't see that email? Most of us are really good at placing excuses on other people. But as a follower of Jesus, am I going to own up to it? Our relationship with our friends and neighbors will change, because they'll know you're dependable. Here's the thing. Being truthful is often countercultural. It's not always something our culture does, but it's the way that we can be salt and light. It's the way we live out these kingdom values in this world. Would love to pray for you this week. We have the connection cards. You have them in your pew as the band comes back to play. Would love to share